Enjoy a seat at the table and good company, where great conversations and meaningful discussions happen.
Welcome to And Good Company. I'm Sarah Fiedelholtz. We all know a great dinner party isn't really about the food. It's about the people sitting around the table, enjoying and engaging in lively discussions. And Good Company gives you a seat at the table to enjoy smart and important conversations as they happen. I am pleased to be in the company of Kara Hackett, the managing editor of Input Fort Wayne. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Sarah.
So Input Fort Wayne is a weekly online digital newsletter that's now in its fourth year?
Going into our third year, actually.
And you have been with it since it launched.
Yep, since day one.
And so I want to take a step back a little bit and talk about the idea of why and how you became a journalist. And you are also a Fort Wayne native.
Yeah, definitely. Born and raised in Fort Wayne. Grew up here, moved away to go to school at Taylor University. Thought I would go into novel writing, actually, originally. But I just kind of felt the pull to get involved more in current events. I was so interested in what was happening, not only, at our campus, but also around the world. And when I was in school, it was the time of the BP oil spill. And it was such a huge global event. And I was just shocked how many students on campus didn't know about it or weren't talking about it. And so I think my drive to start journalism was really just wanting to make that connection and help my peers be talking about things that I saw in the national news that were really important and kind of engage with these stories, because eventually these problems and issues we were seeing we would be inheriting them, as we graduated.
And so you also had to find ways to make it relevant for them. Like I always said, it was, when you saw all the ducks and birds and when they were cleaning them, but the idea of you working to make a story or issues relevant to a time when the majority of colleges, they're just in their bubble.
Yeah, and that's a skill I still use today at Input. We like to reach readers who are 18 to 34 years old. That's historically a group, just in recent years, that has started disengaging with traditional media. And so our big goal at Input is to kind of speak to people who I consider my peers, and get them engaged in local news. So it's kind of a fun little transfer of skills there. But yeah, so after I got involved in my college newspaper, that was, I say, whenever I'm talking to college students, I'm like, get involved in your college newspaper because it's such a great building block and just such good experience for the real world.
I always say that a college campus is literally a microcosm of a city. I mean, you've got your administration, you have lifestyle features, you've got issues, with faculty. It is to cover different beats and stuff.
Oh yeah.
So then so you decided that you wanted to sort of move forth, venture into this world of journalism. So then how did you get that real world experience to get you on your way?
Yeah, definitely. So my sophomore year of college, I applied for an internship at the Indy Star. I actually didn't get it. And then I emailed the intern director and said, I would love to work here someday. What can I do to land this internship next year? And he said, take my convergence course in New York City, which is kind of an odd answer because New York is such a big market. But I got into that program, and it was like a 3-week multimedia program, and they brought in professionals from the New York Times, CNN, and they all did kind of like a crash course with us on, how do you write for a magazine? How do you create an engaging short web film? And how do you use social media, and how do you use your phone to record things? And so it was such good training.
And then they sent you out, right?
They
it was
did.
Baptism by fire. They're
Baptism
like,
by
go
fire.
And get a story. Yeah.
Yeah, so every day of that class, they would be like, all right, your job is to come back and give us a film with, a wide shot, a close-up, and an interview. And then we would have to produce that during the day, just out on the street in New York, learning the subway system. So that was trial by fire too. And then bring it back to class at the end of the day, and they'd show everyone's films.
Right. And it had to be, you had a deadline. It's like a real deadline.
Yeah,
like
real deadline.
Because like when I was in graduate school, I went to Columbia, and so you had to file your story at like 5 o'clock, and you had to print it out and punch it like a timestamp. And if it was 5:01, it was rejected. Like, So because that's importance of deadlines.
Yeah.
So you built your confidence. It gave you the ability, because if you can go up to people in New York and talk to them and get them to talk to you, right?
Yeah.
And it probably solidified that passion that you thought this is the track. So then you
100%.
came back and then what happened?
Yeah, so I thought for a while I would want to go into broadcast media because I really enjoyed some of the video work that we did for that convergence course. And so I applied to all the major TV stations. I happened to get in at Fox News in New York, which I now know is a very political decision. At the time, I was pretty uneducated, and I was a college student.
Because what year was that you were?
Oh gosh, now you're aging me. Let's see, 2012, I want to say.
Yeah, so that was before.
2011.
But it was still under the Roger Ailes and the Belief. But as an intern, I think that it's important for you. Why I think internships are so important is it's not only what you do on your internship, but what you get to observe and to watch and to see how certain decisions are made or how they take a story.
Yes.
So a lot of times I always say to interns, because when I did my first internship at Boston Magazine, I had the world's worst job. I mean, I was opening mail and organizing press releases for the listings editor.
Oh man.
But it was just the time of sitting and watching and listening to what stories and how they were doing things.
Yeah, that was a huge influence for me too, to be honest. Like, luckily we did get some good work to do during that time. I was just kind of sitting in an office writing stories about other college campuses across the US, so it was pretty apolitical work, thankfully. But it was really, I do have like really stark memories, and I kind of, I feel like I saw so many divisions in our country coming that we really witnessed in the Trump era. I just remember watching the television at that time, and they would put up the split screen, and there would be a Democrat on one side and a Republican on the other side, and we actually didn't have sound in our room that I was watching it in because I was typing, But I would look up and I would see these two people, and you could just see their body language as the other one was talking. And while one of them was talking, the other's rolling their eyes and laughing, and then the other one would talk and they would roll their eyes and laugh. And it was just like, wow, it's so divided, and it's such a it can be so divisive to watch the news and to see, cable news networks presenting topics this way. And it actually really influenced my decision to want to come back to Indiana and get into more traditional print journalism and web journalism, because I just felt like, there was so much more to the story, and there's so many more complexities than are shown sometimes in our major national news networks. So I came back to Indiana after that and worked for the Society of Professional Journalists just as an intern for the summer. I was the Freedom of Information intern.
Which is a very important, because the fact that because we have the decline, they've shown every year over the last 15 years, the number of Freedom of Information requests declined by 50% because the
There's
newsrooms
no one to
and
write
stuff.
'em.
But you also see what the value, and so this was the time when you said Edward Snowden, right?
Yes, so I happened to be this Freedom of Information reporter blogging about, the freedom of speech, the rights of reporters to not reveal their sources. The same summer that Edward Snowden released all of the NSA's records to, of course, Glenn Greenwald at The Guardian. And so it was a huge summer to be blogging about that topic. That was also trial by fire.
Right.
And it was a super interesting experience. I was producing like 3 long-form magazine articles for their SPJ magazine. And then I also just did weekly blogs, and I had a great editor I was working with there. And it was a fun experience to kind of get some blogging experience.
What do you think, how would you, because I don't think that blogging is traditional journalistic reporting and writing.
Yeah.
How do you differentiate between blogging and then a reported story?
Yeah, that's a great question. I haven't super thought about it, but I guess I would say I see blogs as more for input. We always define blogs as an opinion piece. If I'm writing a column or kind of more editorial type piece, I'll label it as a blog on our site. But I think at that time, the job of the SPJ Freedom of Information reporter was really to kind of collect information from across the U.S. So I wasn't really, opinionating, putting my opinion on what needs to happen with freedom of information. I was looking to experts who were in our newsrooms across the country, who are SPJ members.
And you said that actually when you, not only were you interested in possibly being a novelist, but you thought you would want to do more op-ed or opinion.
Yeah,
writing.
I did. Definitely in high school and college. And then also when I first worked here at the Journal-Gazette.
That your first job, so you came back and you worked as a reporter for a traditional newspaper.
Yes.
Okay.
And
were you like a general reporter then, or did you have a beat?
I was actually hired as the social media writer, is what they called it. And I was kind of helping them get started on some of the social media platforms in 2013. So It's been a while now.
Right.
But they hadn't had anyone to run social media before that. And it was originally a temporary position. They said, you have a job for 3 months. I was 22. And so I was like, okay, I'm taking a job because it's a job. Hey.
Hey, right.
And it was a great experience. You know, it was hard. I think anyone working in traditional media right now knows how challenging it is. There's just no money. And I think, you know, maybe that's something the public doesn't totally see unless you know someone in news. But so many newspapers across the U.S. and in Fort Wayne are just ghost papers now.
If you're lucky, you even have a paper.
Right,
Because there's all the news deserts. And so much of it is moving online, yet the ad dollars aren't there.
Right, and the publishing models.
Right.
And I think that was a challenge that I always had working at the Journal, because that was everything set up for print. And that's where, you know, the focus is. And then everything was being kind of recycled back onto the web and then recycled again onto social media. And so as a young person kind of entering this industry, it was a really weird position to be in, kind of trying to repurpose everything that was intended for print for the web, because it is a slightly different style of writing.
Right.
And it's a different way of doing headlines and different way of photo.
Because you also have this idea of you have to, for SEO and search. And then you also were probably up against that a lot of traditional journalists who have spent their time in the trenches, and they've been working for 25, 30 years.
People who are very experienced, and to be coming in as the new 22-year-old out of college.
But also telling them things that they needed to do. Right.
Part of my job was that. So it was a challenging position to be in, but it was a great learning experience, and I'm so thankful for it, because, you know, I look back on edits that I got on some of the columns I wrote during that time, and they've really been formative to my writing today. And so I don't regret it at all. It was awesome.
So you, so Issue Media, which is a company out of Detroit, they create, they have a platform where they create these online digital newsletters that are locally focused. And so you really were the editor to launch Input Fort Wayne. So first of all, let's talk about what's the difference between when you are covering a story or writing a story in print versus for online? What do you see as some of the critical goods and bads of it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when I was working at the Journal-Gazette, I was mostly, you know, doing the social media accounts, and then I would also do a weekly online column, and then it was sometimes used in print as well, called Coffee Break. It was kind of what's happening around town, things to do, developments. You know, I noticed that when I moved back to Fort Wayne, I saw so many friends who were my age, people who would ask me on the weekends, you know, you work at the Journal-Gazette, what's happening in Fort Wayne? And they were genuinely interested. But then when I looked at, you know, who was reading our articles on the Journal-Gazette, none of these people were engaging with traditional media. And I was like, why is there this disconnect? You know, people aren't newspaper subscribers anymore, but there's such interest in local news and things that are happening, and sort of, I would say, this emerging spirit of local pride and local, you know, interest in things that are happening locally.
And you really think that's true? Because part of the issue is, I think, is that it's not that people aren't reading newspapers.
Right.
Because even if it's online, I don't necessarily think that people are interested in news. And if they are getting news, it's from their social media feeds. So I'm going to push back on you and say, do you think, because it's also been known when we were traditionally a true newspaper-oriented world, that the average person did not start reading or subscribing to a daily newspaper until they were 25.
Yeah, that makes
So
sense.
there is always, and the newspaper industry from as far back has always claimed about declining readership and not getting younger readers. But you do think that you've seen in your time since launching Input and before that, that the 18 to 34-year-olds are wanting to engage in?
They're wanting news. Whether they want to read a full article, that is to be seen. We've seen good success with it at Input, but who knows what the future will be. You know, I'm a millennial, but Gen Z is coming after us, and they like video a lot. And so I think that you have to separate the media from the medium.
Right.
So I think people are extremely interested in local happenings. And I just say that anecdotally, just from what I see in my peers. You know, people are always, you go out on a Friday night, you used to go out on a Friday night right before the pandemic. That was the first question people would always ask me. They want to know what's happening with Electric Works, what's happening downtown, what's happening, you know, in our regional counties even. And there's just, you know, kind of this gap of information, I think, and there's not always effective ways to get that information. And, you know, we're still learning and growing at Input too. So right now we're really web article based, and we've seen good success with that. So we do see people clicking through, reading the articles, showing interest. We've actually heard from business owners that we've written about that, you did a story about my business, the next day I sold out. And that's just so moving to hear during a pandemic especially. So I do see that really strong interest, and we've had that confirmed multiple times just anecdotally with Input.
Right.
So I think there's a great opportunity, I think news is in a challenging position because there's not always a great way to meet the great need that's there. There's a great desire for local news among, I would say, even people ages 20 to 34. But there's not always the media accessible to them in the places where they get their media.
Right.
National media has a lot more capacity to push stuff out on Instagram, to even be experimenting with more, modern social media tactics, whereas local media doesn't have the same amount of resources. And so at Input, we're just trying to be flexible. We're trying to work with what we have and maximize that to kind of get our content in front of where our readership is.
So, so let's talk a little bit about the launch of Input, and that you're now entering your 4th year, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it was created. It's an online weekly e-newsletter, and it was created by a company, Issue Media. They're out of Detroit, and they have a series, I think now 16 of these type of entities, and they also were looking to create a different business model, which was opposed to ads, having sponsors, and then you also would look to for story ideas and editorial advisement from the sponsors. So, and the idea was that you really were focusing on growth, investment, and people leading their cities and communities.
Yeah, kind of what's next for Northeast Indiana is how we always put it. And just to clarify, we do meet with our sponsors, but we also include non-funding sponsors in that, people who we see as leaders in the community, and we're always trying to broaden that network. So, if people want to engage with us, I would say reach out. You can join us at these editorial advisory sessions, and they're really kind of more brainstorm sessions than they are, I'm setting my editorial calendar, like we're promising to do this story here, when, and how. It's kind of just a brainstorm session, like a think tank for opportunity for local community leaders and grassroots leaders to come together.
And how often do you have them?
Quarterly.
Okay.
So we like to think about ourselves kind of bridging the grassroots leadership in communities with the traditional leadership in communities. We find that they tend to be interested in what each other are doing, but there's not always a space for them to connect and a space to share ideas. And so Issue Media Group's found great success with bringing these two groups together in the 12 communities that they're in. We're one of the most recent, so we're still getting going.
Right.
And then a pandemic started, and so we're still kind of finding our own rhythm. But it's been fun to be a part of so far, I would say. And yeah, I think, did that answer the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
And, but also, I mean, when I started to first work in Fort Wayne, I was commuting from Miami, Florida. So I would joke that Fort Wayne was my beat, so I watched everything. But if you would do local feeds, like follow social media and Facebook and stuff of the newspapers, the television stations, you would think that all there is in Fort Wayne are fires, murders, and car accidents.
Right.
Okay. So partly what else Issue Media wanted to do, and the purpose was to help, because part of in their focus and input was to help recruit talent and people to come to Fort Wayne.
Yes.
So they wanted, in all the cities they were. So they also wanted it to be about positive stories and impact. But they also wanted to
That's a good way of saying
and they wanted to have that so that they could sort of feed the monster for search and get the stories and more positive stories about Fort Wayne.
Yeah, so I can tell you a little bit about that angle too. So our desire with Input Fort Wayne, and I think I don't want to speak for Issue Media Group because they've been around a lot longer than I have, but from what I've seen is our real goal is to kind of be this localized version, hyper-local media of, Wired magazine or Curbed magazine, if you guys have read any of those. It's nothing, we're not trying to report, investigative stories. We're not going to be the one that's telling you if there's major corruption happening somewhere. We're really more interested in sort of what's next from Northeast Indiana, from that talent, that innovators angle, and that grassroots angle. I think, there's so many important stories happening in neighborhoods that haven't been able to be covered. And that's not because local media doesn't want to cover them or local media hates Fort Wayne. It's only because, there have been budget cuts, and it's really hard to keep up with the amount of news that is out there. And so what we've heard from nonprofit partners that we've worked with is, there used to be a whole reporter at the Journal-Gazette assigned to cover nonprofits, and we would get stories about all the exciting things that we're working on all the time, and now no one has time to cover us. And so I think that's why they were so excited to work with Issue Media Group and Input Fort Wayne is there's an opportunity to tell these stories. And what we find, as far as talent attraction goes, what talent tends to look for in cities, it's not even so much amenities as it is people like themselves engaging there and doing important work.
Well, it's now looking at, it's not just about recruitment, it's about also building a quality of place.
Right.
So you talked about the solutions-based, how do you define that?
Yeah, so there's a new movement in journalism. Actually, I shouldn't say new. I actually don't know how new it is, but I just found out about it, right?
Okay.
New to Kara.
Okay.
It's called Solutions Journalism. Check out the Solutions Journalism Network. It's really cool. They approach stories. So instead of in traditional media, we tend to approach stories just telling people what happened.
Well, the traditional is you're a reporter.
Right.
Your job is to report.
Right.
Who, what, where, when, why.
Right.
With some how. Right.
Right.
And you're objective and you're
right. Solutions journalism is we're going to tell the story from the angle of who is working to create solutions in communities. So it's not always happy news. It's not always positive news. We've done stories, about evictions, terrible things that are not positive, or even put Fort Wayne in a positive light. But we're approaching them from the angle of who locally is making a difference and who is trying to solve some of these challenges. And I think that's kind of where we lean into that Wired magazine aspect of innovation, because we're trying to talk to local innovators, who are really entrenched in these problems. What could make a difference here? What is your team working on? How are you innovating in this space? And how is what you're doing connecting to, what people are doing in Detroit or Cincinnati or a number of other markets where we also have publications? And I think that's what's also been so excited about working for Issue Media Group is they have this national footprint of a lot of up and coming cities similar to Fort Wayne.
The tier 3 cities, this is their time, yeah.
Right, and it's this cool opportunity to kind of expand our boundaries in Fort Wayne. I think coming from having worked in bigger markets, New York and Indianapolis, I kind of have had a national perspective, but sometimes on local issues, when you talk to people don't always think outside of the bounds of what's been possible in Fort Wayne in the past.
Right.
And I think it's so cool to see, Detroit is doing some really cool initiatives, Cincinnati's doing some really cool initiatives, or maybe on the flip side, people are making mistakes in other cities. How can we avoid those
Well, that's
mistakes?
Like the alley activation type of things and those kind of programs. But also, I sort of believe that people, although I can't find any, real data, I could do this anecdotally, that people who live in cities are interested in what's happening in other cities. Just because that's where they like to travel, or, and then also they can bring things back. And so I think that that's also of interest, and then you could tap in to see if something's happening here. Is it a trend, or is it something you're seeing across the board?
Yeah, that's been super exciting about this job is it always pushes me to see, I don't just focus in on Fort Wayne, we also focus it on what's happening around the world, because I think what we're learning during this pandemic is we're all so intimately connected.
Well, and the fact of it is the medium in which you work, which is online and digital and the internet, it is a connector. And that's where you made that point. You have to separate out the medium from the media.
Right.
Because your medium, you can Google and, watch videos and learn about things going on in Australia.
Yeah.
So it's, so I think it is making it, but people still want to know the things that are happening in their backyards.
Yes.
So as you enter the 4th year, how has input...
Third year, actually.
Third year, that's right. How has input evolved and changed over time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was just thinking about this myself the other day, actually. So when we started, I didn't have much of a framework personally for what this would be. And I think Brian didn't totally either, because
he's the co-CEO of Issue Media.
Yeah, Brian, to clarify, is my boss, the co-CEO of Issue Media Group, the founder. And what they do, when they go into markets is it's not really a cookie cutter model. It's kind of like, we know that this media is important. We know this type of reporting is important. Let's see how it works in this community. Let's see what sticks, and let's see what doesn't stick, and let's adapt. And that's what's been so exciting. And I think, for a while I thought, I wouldn't want to go back into news because it just seemed like there's such a gap in some ways between the way news is reported and the way communities want to get their news.
Okay, but you said you wouldn't go back to news, but you
Right.
are in the news business.
Right, I did make the decision.
So maybe you're not. Maybe you're saying the traditional print,
Well, I
but
thought
maybe
all together for a while. So when I had left the Journal-Gazette, I felt like, maybe news isn't my thing. Maybe I need to try advertising for a while.
or maybe you need to go write that novel, right?
Right, exactly.
But what is your
yeah.
involvement in input shown you?
Well, it's shown me, there's so many exciting ways that news can evolve to meet the needs of communities.
Or maybe how I look at it, it's that redefining what is news.
Yeah.
And how you the different ways to tell a story.
Yeah, the different ways to tell a story.
Because, for instance, again, it's understanding the medium.
Yes.
Because in print, you can do a 1,000-word to 10,000-word article, like the New York Times Magazine. Online, you are never going to do that.
Yeah.
Because people aren't going to read that long. So I think, or you can do stories now where it's completely shown with photos with enhanced captions, or it's just a visual graphic.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's understanding because you are in the news business.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Because you are disseminating information and
So my
making
point was I thought for a while I couldn't be in the news industry, but I did end up coming back with Issue Media Group because I felt like this is a model that I could really jive with. This is something that's really flexible. It's hyper local, and so it's not this cookie cutter thing from Detroit that's being pushed onto Fort Wayne. It's been really grassroots, and it's been really flexible. We do assessments after every story series we run. We look at our numbers, we look at data, we see what's working and what's not working, and we're always, I think most importantly, just kind of engaging with our readers and our community because they're the ones who are really, helping us drive this coverage. We like to not, elevate our voices as Input Fort Wayne or Issue Media Group, but elevate the voices of communities in Fort Wayne, and particularly communities that have been underserved and maybe even harmed by traditional media, which I would say Southeast Fort Wayne. We did a big series on the ground Southeast last year.
So the on ground, so let's talk about what that is.
Yeah, so On the Ground, it's actually a program that has been done in other cities throughout Issue Media Group's network. It's kind of going into a neighborhood or a community where there has been either no news reporting or negative news reporting in the past. And it's lifting up leaders in that community and giving them the chance to be the journalists. So we work with people from Southeast, train them, in just traditional media practices at Issue Media Group and Input Fort Wayne.
Right.
And then
because good reporting and good storytelling is good reporting, good storytelling, regardless of the media.
Right. And so, and then we give them the chance to tell their own stories. And what we see is there's just so many stories that aren't being told by people from those communities because, news, like every other industry, it's had a bad racial past. It's had a bad past period. It hasn't been an inclusive space. And so what we found with these programs is that they've allowed communities that maybe have been hurt or disengaged by the media to get an opportunity to tell stories from their perspective. And we just see so much power in that, and
you also told stories in different ways. Like you didn't only just put them in the Input newsletter because you did some oral sort of get-togethers.
Yes, so that's a part of, thanks for thinking of that. So we do 2 events as part of our On the Ground series as well, and these are just meant to be thank yous to the community in a lot of ways. We work with a community partner, so it's not us as Issue Media Group just coming in and throwing some events that we think that a community needs. In this case, we were working with Bridge of Grace, Raina Bradley, and Javier Mondragon.
They're amazing.
Yeah, they are. And so they're rooted in Southeast. They've been there. They actually run the neighborhood association meetings for their neighborhood. And so
that's Mount Vernon Park.
Yes, Mount Vernon Park. And so we just support them with funding to kind of blow this event up, make it exciting, make it fun. Of course, we had to blow it up with limited seating during COVID because we didn't want it to get too intense, but it was all outside. And we've just had incredible people donate their time to this project as well. I want to give a shout out to DJ Eclipse with Blacklight Media. He came out to our last On the Ground event and just took photos of people in the community and gave people, an opportunity to get that family photo that maybe they hadn't gotten before.
That's great.
Or, we've seen such power too in having headshots of people and kind of giving people that chance to get a professional headshot and what that can do to,
So you utilize your resources to give back to the community.
Right, and actually in that case, he was donating his time for that. So he was utilizing his resources. But yeah, we also do pay photographers, pay reporters, and we pay all of our reporters who write for us.
And are you continuing with the On the Ground Southeast, or was that a program that had a limited?
Yeah, so we always look to keep engaging with communities where we do on the ground programs. It's not meant to be a project that's like a one-time come in and done, and then leave forever. So we do regularly report with On the Ground, something that we do regularly report on Southeast. Something that came out of that partnership as well was an opportunity to work more closely with Inkspot Fort Wayne, or Fort Wayne Inkspot, I believe. Right. Fred McKissick there, he's really an incredible partner.
The managing editor, and then John Dorch, who's the publisher. Yep.
Yes, and John's great too.
And that's a traditional media, because that's a bi-weekly African-American local newspaper.
Yep, largely print. And so it's just been a great relationship, because we'll publish stories online, they publish them in print, and we're kind of able to get, double bang for every story we do about Southeast that way. And we're seeing, more people engaging with their print product, more people engaging with our web product. It's just been a really exciting partnership.
And then you just also recently started a street team?
Yes, so this was kind of a pandemic idea that came to mind. During the pandemic this past year, I felt like I was personally just getting so much of my news from social media. And whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, right? Like, I do keep up with traditional media, but I would also find myself clicking through my Instagram stories and seeing, not only important news, but also just kind of fun news, Vogue magazine articles or updates from influencers on social media.
Yeah, like I see, like, sometimes my Facebook and stuff, like who's following or who follows it, and then I see it,
Yeah, and so I just felt like, this is a place, if I'm going here in my spare time and, I'm 30 years old, how many other 30-year-olds or 20-year-olds are out there clicking through their Instagram stories, and how can we get in front of that audience? Because something I've heard talking to a lot of business owners during the pandemic is how much social media has really helped them stay in touch with their community during this time and to make sales. And we're not in the sales business necessarily with news. It's very more just getting our information out there. But it's like what one of the business owners told me is, you have to stay in front of your customer. And our customer at Issue Media Group is anyone who's interested in reading articles. Our stories are totally free, so that's made possible by our sponsors and underwriters.
Right.
So it's totally free content. But we just want people to find these stories and to engage with them, because we find them really powerful and important, and we think our readers will find them powerful and important.
And you're driven by really a subscription model. It's a free subscription model.
Yes.
So how many subscribers do you currently have?
Yeah, so I actually would say we're totally driven by a subscription model. That's historically been how Issue Media Group has, got started. They started 10 years ago in Detroit. A weekly email newsletter was a huge part of that startup, and it's definitely played a role here too. So we currently have about 3,000 email subscribers, and it's a great community. A lot of business leaders, a lot of people who are hyper engaged in our community are part of that subscriber list, and anyone is welcome. We would really love to grow that. We would love to see all of Fort Wayne on our email subscriber list. But what we find is most people really engage with our content on social media. So on social media, we're seeing reach for articles go up to like 700,000.
So let's say when you post, like you've started this new series, the Input Home Tour series. So you'll put it in the newsletter.
Yes.
And then it is online.
Yes.
And then what will you do? Then you'll also put it through your social media feed that people can find. Because people aren't traditionally going to a homepage anymore. And then because people are coming to things all different ways.
Yes.
And then you also, one of the things that you talk about with the use of social media and digital is that you do have this ability for analytics. Like, you know what stories and who's doing them. Because when you do traditional media, you send out, you don't know unless somebody writes a letter or, and most of the time I always joke that no news was good news.
That's what I say too.
I would like hold my breath for like 2 days and then wait and see, and then, because that's usually when you hear from people. So in your analytics and evaluation, what are the types of stories that you have found are the most compelling, or the topics that you resonate with the community?
Food. But I don't think that's super surprising. Our readers love food stories. And usually, it's funny, any list story, our college, we work with college interns, and they always pitch to me these story ideas that are list-based. And I'm not super interested in that. I'm more like you, where I kind of want an in-depth article. So the story
No. When I edit and create magazines,
Sure.
You know what sells more magazines on covers?
Yeah.
10 things
That's
too.
exactly.
Five things to know about your
Yes.
boyfriend. Oh yeah, no,
Yep.
it's these. But that's only one type of,
Right. Right.
But yeah, so you
We
found
could
that
see good
anything that's,
success.
well, because it's easy to digest, it's sort of a quick hit,
Yes.
it's a way to, what I say is a very quick way to curate and aggregate
Yes.
information.
Yes.
Okay, so
And so we see good
but what
success with
about, because you have areas of focus, so,
Yes.
economic development, governments and nonprofit, rural living, social innovation.
Yeah.
How do those kinds of topics resonate, and what have you seen? Because
Yeah.
I believe that yes, getting information and I don't really believe in reader surveys in a sense, because part of it is that as a journalist, it's your job to not only give you the types of stories that you like,
Right.
but also to
Right.
give you the types of stories that
You
that
need.
we think are important, just for you to
Yes.
know about or just to be aware
Yes.
of. So how do you? Because if you are so analytics, and you look at it and you see, well, when we do stories about
Right.
economic development, or when we talk about looking at the budget and there have been these budget cuts or what have you, maybe they don't resonate as high. So how do you balance that?
The beauty is with input, we've never been pressured to be click driven. So while we do, yes, look at the analytics, and while we know that anytime we post a food story, that's going to be the #1 story for the month, we don't let that drive us, because that's really the goal and purpose behind Input Fort Wayne. My boss, Brian Boyle, when he was in Detroit, he was seeing so many stories in his local media market that were driven by clicks. It was all blood and gore and PG-13 material.
Well, because the traditional, local news market, if it bleeds, it leads.
Right.
So,
Well, that was definitely the
and
case.
then
that
definitely
he
you
was
saw
seeing.
that during the pandemic. Like
Right.
people were like, okay, I just need some good news. Like
Right.
I can't think of his name. He's married to Emily Blunt. John.
I know who played on The Office.
Yeah. So he created, some good news,
Yes.
and it went viral. This show, and
Right.
now it's going to be actually created as a show, a weekly show on NBC. Like
Nice.
people are just like, enough bad news. Like
Yes.
just give me some good news.
Yes.
So that became more important during
Yeah.
the pandemic.
So we've never been driven by clicks because that was originally in our founding. It's like we're not going to let what bleeds leads. We're going to put what we think on the front page should be on the front page. And sometimes, it's a lighter story about a new restaurant opening. Sometimes that's a heavier story about systemic racism in Fort Wayne and sort of how that's been embedded in our society, just like every other society across the U.S. And what we've seen even with those heavier stories, the stories that maybe don't make it to the very top of the click list, they're still getting hundreds of views and they're still making an impact and getting shared a lot. We did a story as part of our On the Ground Southeast series as part of the stress that Black mothers face in giving birth.
Right.
And that was one of our top read stories
Right,
that
because
month.
because the infant mortality rates of
Yes,
mothers
and
is
how
still
it plays into infant mortality
is
rates.
still very high in the minority communities.
Yeah, our writer Angela Stanley did that, and she did a fantastic job. And so it's been really exciting not only to see, the fun success that we have with stories that are just about restaurant reviews or
Right.
something, but some of the deeper stories that we think are so important that maybe haven't been covered in traditional media and that are getting a platform here and that are really finding a market. And yeah, they've
So
been
how do
doing
you,
well.
as people a lot of times don't necessarily understand the role of an editor, and so part of it is to ensure that you have a balance of the types of stories, the areas you're covering. I always say that being the editor is a benign dictatorship, because somebody has to be driving the train, like have a vision and be able to answer, when someone pitches a story, for you to say, well, how does that fulfill our mission or objective? So what is your sort of benign dictatorship or vision and mission for Input Fort Wayne, and how do you think that that's evolved over the past 3 years?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like I kind of go with my gut in some ways. I listen to a lot of sources, and I think that's the biggest thing is just, as a white woman who's, lived a fairly privileged life in my 30s, I don't always know what stories are most important to our community. And so I just make it my goal as the editor to be in touch with as many people of as many diverse backgrounds as possible, and then see what stories resonate with them and what stories they send to me. And just always try to do a good job. For me, it's almost not as a dictatorship, it's more of like I'm kind of the sieve through who, I'm trying to make sure we don't publish
No,
5 stories.
I don't mean it like a dictatorship, like we're only going to cover these types of stories. I mean that somebody has to have a vision, and someone, in order to ensure that your stories, you have a good mix, you have a good balance.
That's exactly.
You want to make sure that you're not only, that you're doing stories that fulfill your mission and objective and will be appealing to all your readership. Because you don't only want stories that would only be relevant to new mothers, and you don't want stories that are only relevant to people who just moved here. So what I mean by that is someone, and also you need to make sure that it publishes on time.
You need a leader.
So that's why I say it that way.
No, it's great.
And I always believe the best editors were once reporters. And I also think that as this editor, if you have a vision, if you can articulate that to the people who write for you and explain to them what you are looking to achieve, then you let them go. And then, but definitely. So that's what I mean by that. Not like literally saying we're only going to do these types of stories, but in terms of that kind of vision. Yeah,
we always tell I kind of give everyone a really in-depth overview of how Issue Media Group got started. Everyone who writes for us or produces content, I sit them down and now I don't sit them down, but I have a phone conversation or a Zoom conversation and tell them about our founding, because I think our founding is so important to who we are and what we're trying to do with this platform. Just as kind of a quick summary, we write about entrepreneurship, innovation, what's next for Northeast Indiana.
So you have 15 targeted,
we do.
But they're very,
kind of all around
because you got lifestyle projects, lake living, and then you do have key ones because of the purpose of talent, tech innovation, entrepreneurship, economic development, and growth.
Those are all kind of what we see as in the bucket of what's next for Northeast Indiana. And so whenever I talk to a new reporter, I tell them about Issue Media Group's founding, which it was in Detroit about 10 years ago. Brian had moved away, was living in the national market, felt like the only national news he was seeing about Detroit, if any, was really negative news. And there was a lot of negative things happening. Well, that was when it was with the auto industry. Auto industry crash. And mayor was in jail. It was pretty bad. Bankruptcy, But what he saw when he moved back to Detroit was that that's not the only news that was happening. There were artists and people in their neighborhoods giving back to their communities. There were innovators coming up with really cool ideas in Detroit that weren't making the national media that should be. And so he created Model D there, that was our flagship publication, as a way to elevate those stories and to sort of work with communities that maybe hadn't thought of themselves as newsmakers or worthy of news before. He talked to innovators who were really grassroots guys and they never really saw themselves as thought leaders. But once there was a story done on them, they started to think, maybe I do have some value here as a leader. And so it's been this really exciting journey. And so I think that's what I use to kind of guide our reporters and our photographers as we go about telling stories in Fort Wayne. And are you seeing that that's true in terms of your identifying these grassroots leaders or somebody who may not consider themselves a leader, and then you find that that's true here too? Yeah, definitely. So many people have reached out and said, I never would have thought someone should have written an article about me, but they did, and now I've been asked to speak at this convention, or I've been asked to talk. We did a story for our On the Ground series again about woman Diane Rogers, who is a former police officer, a black woman who is also a neighborhood leader in her community, the Oxford Community Association. Has been doing some incredible grassroots neighborhood work in Oxford area. And we did a big profile on her and a short video with NeighborLink, so thanks to them for that partnership. But it was just really, she called me crying, the day after it came out and said, I just had no idea. It was really moving to see my story written. She's like, obviously I've always known my story, but it's crazy to see that written out. It also gives it validation, and so it's see that you're making a difference. Because I think that's what so many innovators feel in cities is, or at least what I hear when I talk to people who I consider innovative, does my work even make a difference? I'm doing all this stuff. I'm trying so hard to just, keep things afloat, and whether it's my business, whether it's my neighborhood, whether it's these projects that I poured my life and passion into, is it making a difference? And some of the issues that they're looking to conquer are just so big that it's hard to remember that every adventure, everything starts with one step. And so but how has also the pandemic sort of affected and impacted how you cover what you choose to cover, and then also has that impacted or affected your sponsors and economic support? Yeah, thankfully our sponsors have really seen the value in the work we do, and they've stuck with us throughout this time. We're so grateful because we know everyone's been affected by this pandemic, and it's been really hard on some. Some have benefited in some ways from increased business. But for the most part, a lot of people have been hit really hard by this, and we're just so thankful that people still see value in our work. And I think, what I've seen during this time, this might be going a little off topic, but it's like just the value that we can provide to communities during this time. It's like, I've been watching a lot of Netflix in my spare time during the pandemic.
Right.
Do you ever watch Chef's Table?
Yes.
Yes, and so what's so fascinating to me about, so Chef's Table, for anyone who doesn't know, it's kind of this documentary style look at a different chef across the US and around the world, and just kind of this innovative chef and how they got started and how they're solving problems in their industry. And what they do, what strikes me about that show almost every time I watch it is they say, the chef will be telling their story and they'll say, I was a hole in the wall restaurant.
Right.
I was just making this family recipe that I thought was amazing. No one would ever come. And then a journalist came and did a story. And now I'm booked out and I'm a 5-star, I've been given a Michelin star. And it's like, I just saw the power, I guess, of media to help grassroots innovators get their stories out there and to encourage people to kind of step outside of their comfort zones and maybe try something that they haven't considered before. And I think that's so cool about doing this work in Fort Wayne. Did you ever watch City of Gold by Jonathan Gold, the LA restaurant critic, food critic?
Yes.
So amazing. So Jonathan Gold, for anyone who doesn't know, was a really famous food critic in Los Angeles. Really a humble guy, though, not like I think when you think food critic, you might think, ritzy, fancy.
Yeah.
He actually is the only food critic who has won the Pulitzer Prize for reporting on food, which is so amazing.
Well, because he made them, it's a narrative, and he told stories.
Yes.
And so I think that there's a double-edged sword about the impact that your stories can have. One is, yes, they can get people and engage and get, but it also makes it that journalists and reporters have to, not that you have to remember that importance to what you do, is that people will read it and you could influence them. Now you don't ever want to write to just for your readers, but you do need to think about that role and how you serve that, and that making sure it's balanced and fair. And
that's a huge part of our work too. And what Jonathan Gold did was so inspiring to me, particularly with our work at Issue Media Group. Not that we're anywhere near as amazing as him, he's awesome, but he never wrote a bad review, and it's not because he never tried a bad restaurant. If he didn't like a restaurant,
he just didn't write. He didn't write. Well, that's that's what you would call the Vogue. When I worked at Vogue magazine, and also when I was a reporter at Women's Wear Daily, which is the trade journal. So a lot of editors take the belief that you have such a limited amount of space. And also this was a way for them not to have to compromise for advertising. So let's say Ralph Lauren at Women's Wear Daily, which is the trade journal, had a very bad fall show. Okay. You can't, and Vogue cannot write about saying how bad the show was because Ralph Lauren is one of their, top advertisers. So what you would do is you just wouldn't write about it. And the argument is that you have such a limited amount of space that, and if your purpose, and again, that's understanding your mission. Now, like a daily newspaper, that is their mission. Reporting. So they could report and tell you. But,
100%.
But if your mission is about to engage the community, so the idea is that if you just don't think it's worthy of giving it space. So,
and there are issues, obviously, racism, structural barriers in our society that are problems that need to be addressed, and we do report about those.
But there's a way you can do it. I mean, it's a way of, like you said, it's a lot of traditional traditional reporting is pointing out the problem. Like there's this happening, or there's corruption, or they're not spending this money right. But what you do is sort of it's not a positive spin on it, but it's presenting the problem by showing the solutions that are being done. And so it's that kind of, it is a little bit more, I think, an offshoot of the whole idea comes out of positive psychology and mindfulness.
Yeah, I totally agree. And what we've seen is how it benefits underserved communities, in which Jonathan Gold's work did as well. What he did with his career was get people in Los Angeles to go out of their comfort
Well,
zones.
that's the whole thing. I mean, most people, and I tried to do that, I tried to do that too, is the idea that most people will not go within 3 miles from where they work or where they live.
And in Fort Wayne, that is such our story.
Because when I started in Fort Wayne, and I remember I had to go to Roanoke, and people said, it's so far.
Yeah.
So I thought,
it's 20 minutes.
So I thought, okay, I better leave, an hour before. And I got there in 15 minutes, and I'm like, this is not, everything is 20 minutes.
Right.
But it's getting people out of their comfort zone or getting out of these false demarcations like southeast, and you can't go, past, Pettit Avenue or, someone said from downtown, or the perception of coming downtown.
Right.
Like people don't think it's safe, or that, so it's also shifting those, and the way you do that is by sharing and telling engaging stories.
And what I just saw with Jonathan Gold's documentary is ways he was able to do that in Los Angeles. How can we translate that to Fort Wayne, and how can we get, that family in Fort Wayne that's never left their corner of southwest Fort Wayne or northeast Fort Wayne to kind of come downtown, or to consider something different, or to go southeast, or vice versa. It's like, how can we get people intermingling and sharing ideas and trying something new? And they'll probably end up enjoying it, because there's so many talented people in this community, and there's so much talent and innovation here that maybe people just don't see on their day-to-day commute.
Right, because they're just not aware of it, and they sort of do live in their bubble.
And it's hard in Indiana. I mean, when I was living in New York, every morning you have to wake up early, you have to walk a whole hour and get on the subway and get to work, and you're just encountering so many different people and ideas, even in just that silly hour commute to and from work.
No, and I would, the things that you see, and
it exposes you to so much. And in Fort Wayne, it's really easy here to lean into the convenience, I think, of the Midwest, and to get in your car in the morning, especially now during the pandemic. Like, who's going anywhere they don't absolutely have to go?
Right.
And so it's like, I think that's our big goal at Input, even during this time. I think that was your original question, was, how is the pandemic shifting what we're doing? I just see it as ever more important now that, we're not having even as many chance encounters as we had before. How can Input give our readers that chance encounter?
Or the ones that are doing like love bombs, like for a restaurant or a business, and sort of, but I also think that we started this conversation was, you want to understand the medium in which you're working, and then how to use that to do positive work, but also to present everything that's happening, good, bad, pretty, ugly, about the community. And
it's a learning process. We do think we do valuable work and exciting work, and we've seen good success with it, but we are not totally the experts. We're still learning, we're still growing, we're still looking to adapt and figure out what's next and what needs to be done.
Right, and that's why also sometimes I don't like reader surveys or analytics, because I always believe that part of it is, I'm gonna give you the types of stories that I know you want. But I also want to give you stories that we think you are important, or that you should know about, or stories that maybe will get you to get out of your comfort zone, or to be engaged and get involved. So I think it's important to, so sometimes, like, if I thought a story was really important, but maybe it didn't register with it probably would inspire me to want to write another story about why you really should care about the first story. But it's sort of that idea, and really. But it's also recognizing that there is a lot going on in the community, and like when people here say, oh, there's nothing, but even before there's nothing to do in Fort Wayne, and I said, well, you know what? I came from Miami, and people would say that to me. There's nothing to do in Miami. So that's a common mantra anywhere, but it's because people have to seek it out, and you just have to seek out. And what you're trying to do is sort of make it a little easier for them to see. As they see.
Because what we see, people ask me, do you have enough to write about? And I'm like, are you kidding? We have 100 story ideas that I can't even get to right now, because we only publish 3 to 5 stories a week. We're not publishing a daily issue. It's once a week. And there's so many important stories that need to be told. And so it's like, I just love the fact that there's so many media outlets kind of telling these stories, because that's our real goal, is just to elevate powerful local people and ideas.
Right, exactly. And I think that, you never, if you're really curious and a true journalist, you never run out of ideas.
Right.
And maybe some of those might even become the ideas for your novel.
Right.
So you never know.
You're remembering my novel.
Oh, yeah.
I like this. I actually am working on a little novel, but it's a more true story based. So we'll see.
You can start with a short story. That's how people start.
Exactly.
So, At the end of each And Good Company program, I ask guests the same 12 questions that French novelist Marcel Proust popularized from a Victorian parlor game.
That's fun.
So, what is your favorite word?
Oh my gosh. Okay. That's so hard. I'm trying to think as a writer. Like, that's a bad question for a writer because we use so many words.
Brad Little, the
what did he say?
president, I really liked his, the president of the Community Foundation, his favorite word was perhaps.
Oh, that's a good
one.
one.
I mean, like some people have come up with some, I really like that one because that's a good way of saying instead of no, like perhaps.
Oh my gosh. Now I'm so pressured. Okay, this is bad to ask an indecisive person.
Just go with whatever first comes into your head.
I like the concept of what's next. You know, we've used that a lot.
Okay.
It's not one word, it's two words.
It's okay. Well, it's actually three.
Yeah.
But that's okay.
Right, yeah, hyphen or apostrophe.
Okay.
But yeah,
okay.
What's next? I like that.
What's your least favorite word?
I feel like the stereotypical answer is like moist or ointments. I just heard a whole like NPR thing on the word moist.
Right, okay.
But yeah, I think those are kind of odd.
Because words that evoke a negative emotional.
Yeah, or just I think that it's that O sound, that ointment, you know, it's just odd.
It just oozes, yeah.
Yeah.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Oh my gosh. Passion. I think seeing passionate people, yeah.
What turns you off creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Closed-mindedness.
What sound or noise do you love?
Sound or noise. How happy my dog is whenever like she's prancing around the house.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Oh, kind of the sound of people like chewing on bananas, I think is kind of gross.
Okay, that's very specific.
Very specific.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
A profession other than my... Oh, I would love to be a fashion designer.
What profession would you not like to do?
Oh my gosh. Surgery. I really get sick to my stomach with the sight of lead.
Okay. What do you consider your greatest achievement?
Oh my gosh. Probably the relationships I've built with my family and my friends and the people important to me.
And in the community, I guess.
In the community, yeah. Input.
Who, living or dead, would you most like to have a conversation with?
My father. He died in a car accident when I was 4.
How would you like to die?
Peacefully in my sleep when I'm old.
If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
That's so hard. Probably, there's the classic Christian answer of well done, good and faithful servant. I guess that's what we all hope for, right? I haven't thought about that one.
Okay.
It's a good question, Sarah.
Well, you can get back to me on that one.
Seriously.
Well, I want to thank you for coming and giving us some input and insight into your work and the importance of covering the community. So
thanks so much for having me. This was super fun.
You can learn more about And Good Company and all the other great conversations we have had at andgoodcompany.info. We look forward to next week when we again invite you to enjoy a seat at the table for great conversation and good company.